Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's a live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
Tune in to Lead Story, weekdays at 6 p.m. Hosted by Jody Ann Quarry.
Brought to you by VC's Electrical Sales. Quality products at affordable prices.
Good evening and welcome to Lead Story's Global Lead. Tonight we're examining what power looks like when it's exercised without consent and what that means for small states, international law and regional stability. From Venezuela to the Caribbean to the wider world, we ask whether the rules that were meant to restrain power are still holding. This is Lead Story. We begin today's show inside Venezuela because in recent days, international action involving President Nicolas Maduro has triggered sharp reactions diplomatically, legally, and politically. Let's take a look at this clip to help us understand just what took place over the past few days. All right, but before we go into that, as we overview what has taken place over the last few days with President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, moved out of the country thanks to U.S. actions on Saturday, we want to see what has happened. Let's take a quick look at this video, helping us explain where we are as at today.
Wearing handcuffs, dressed in prison clothes and surrounded by heavily armed guards, Nicolas Maduro began the journey from the prison in Brooklyn, where he's being held, to his first US court appearance. TV cameras followed every step of the elaborate security operation, the images illustrating the deposed president's humiliation. Maduro, seemingly walking with a limp, and his wife Celia Flores were then put on board a helicopter bound for Manhattan. After arriving at a waterfront heliport, they were escorted towards an armoured vehicle. Historic scenes, the Trump administration say, show a law enforcement action, while others see an illegal foreign military operation. Finally, the motorcade arrived at the courthouse around 7:40 in the morning.
US Arab everywhere!
Outside, some demonstrators celebrated Maduro's capture. Others, angry about President Trump's claim that he will run Venezuela and control its oil. Maduro and his wife both pled not guilty to charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. Ms. Flores had a bandage on her forehead and what looked like bruising on her face. Inside the courtroom, Nicolas Maduro was asked only to enter a plea. But speaking in Spanish, he insisted that he is still the president of his country, complained that he had been kidnapped by the United States, and described himself as a prisoner of war. Maduro was returned to prison after his brief court appearance. And this is just the start of a legal process that could last for years.
a legal process that could last for years. But before we debate the law or global power shifts, we want to understand what's being experienced by people on the ground. Now joining us inside Lead Story from Venezuela, we have journalist and human rights activist Luis Carlos Diaz. Good evening, Luis Carlos Diaz, and thanks for joining us inside Lead Story.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you in Jamaica.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. Jamaicans are watching a situation that is concerning to them, but they don't know how it looks from on the inside. So help us. From inside Venezuela, how are ordinary people understanding what has happened involving Nicolas Maduro? Is it being seen as a legal action, a political move, or a violation of national sovereignty?
Well, it's difficult to understand what's happening inside because the government has a strong censorship against all the media in Venezuela. All the radio, all the TV stations are under censorship since decades ago, and we don't have newspaper. And all the websites who are informing about this are blocked. So the people are using WhatsApp, the people are using social media to reach to the information. So you have some different views. One of them are clapping because Maduro is in jail, because he is a dictator, he is a narcotraffic dealer, and he is engaged in crimes against humanity. On the other hand, you have some people in the Chavismo movement thinking that they suffer a treason of their own Chavistas, because these type of things happen only because Delcy Rodriguez sold Maduro to the Americans. So it's really funny because in this moment, the political party who are being obeyed to the United States is Delcy Rodriguez, is the own Chavismo. So we don't have a debate about the international laws or things like that because the operation was an extraction. We don't have Marines inside Venezuela in this moment, but we have Cubans agents, Chinese agents, Iranian agents, and Russian agents, and that is a violation of the sovereignty of the country.
This you've spoken about as Chavismo, or a continuation of what Hugo Chavez, the predecessor of Nicolas Maduro, had put in place. What's the reaction on the ground right now, given that Delcy Rodriguez, the former vice president of Nicolas Maduro, has now been made president of the country? Is that a continuation, some see, of Hugo Chavez's legacy, or is it expected to be a different Venezuela now?
No, it's the same package, it's the same system, the same regime. We have a change of the leadership, but the regime is the same. It's a dictatorship. They have political prisoners, like 1,000 political prisoners, even journalists, human rights defenders, nurses, teachers, students. They have a lot of people, and even the Chavismo has foreigners like political prisoners. 25 people from Colombia, more than 20 from Spain, people from 25 different countries. And that type of regime is really close. Venezuelans are not free. And that's why we are waiting for a regime change, a real regime change. But at the same time, we understand that for Donald Trump or Marco Rubio, they need people inside the government to make some changes. But we don't know whole type of deal Delcy Rodriguez made with them to send Maduro and to control the power. So we are afraid that now we have the strongest dictatorship against us because we are not seeing which is the next step on this plan.
How is the Venezuelan government, because you said they have full control over the media, how are they framing the incident, this incident domestically, and how much space do journalists have, even though there is repression there, to report any perspectives that differ from the official narrative from the government?
It's like a funny thing, and I'm sorry for that, but it's funny because they are saying, oh, we are victims of an attack of United States. But at the same time, they say, oh, we need to cooperate with United States in these next steps. So it's funny because for all the history of the Chavismo, they talk against United States, and they are like a revolution, and they are resisting, and even they say things like, oh, we are going to be a next Vietnam. But now they are afraid they are cooperating with the United States, and they are thinking each other who is going to be the next people who has suffered, who will suffer at treason. So inside the Chavismo, there is a lot of afraid because nobody knows what to do with the power, because some people are afraid to be under detention. Remember this. Nicolas Maduro had a reward of $50 million, but at the same time, Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino Lopez, the defense ministry, they both have $15 million of reward. So they are waiting. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
They don't know, but it's certainly going to be then concerning for them seeing the extraction that took place inside Venezuela with 80 persons confirmed dead, some of them Cuban nationals, 32 of those. You're also then seeing this fear and this concern. But as journalists who are reporting what's going on, have you noticed any changes in the atmosphere for journalists and civil society, or for others who work in this space, especially the opposition as well? Or are you seeing increased pressure, greater caution, or heightened risk for those who are now opposing voices?
No, sorry, but yesterday the Delcy Rodriguez regimes put in jail 14 journalists, 14 in one day. All these journalists was under interrogation in hiding place by the counterintelligence corps. They rob all the computers and the telephones, and even they download all the data for 14 journalists. One of them was expelled from the country because he was a foreigner. These journalists passed the longest hour of their life under detention. And at the other side, in the border with Colombia, they expelled several missions of journalists who are trying to enter to the country. So the censorship is really, really hard under Delcy Rodriguez regime. And in fact, the block in the internet is worse today. But we don't know if in the table between Rubio and Delcy Rodriguez, we don't know if they are talking about freedom of speech, of the liberation of the political prisoner. We don't know, but we are waiting for the next step. And at the same time, we are making this type of pressure, talking with international media, talking with a lot of people, because we know that a lot of people maybe are not, maybe they are not feel secure with Donald Trump, or they are not feeling secure about the United States. I understand that, because we are Latin American, we are part of this continent. We know that. But in the case of Nicolas Maduro, the narco-traffic cartel, the type of crime that they committed, it's necessary a hard action against that, because if you left alone Venezuela, so the problem are going to be bigger and bigger. In fact, in this moment, we have 9 million of Venezuelans outside Venezuela, like in exile. It's a third part of the country.
Given that as a reality, President Donald Trump yesterday, through the Secretary of State's Twitter account, had this to say, that this hemisphere belongs to the United States. This is our hemisphere. That's what he said in a tweet with the Department of State, saying that President Donald Trump will not allow our security to be threatened. For all that's going on inside Venezuela, for all that you're hoping for the release of political prisoners, does it concern you that the President of the United States, after this military action, frames it as protecting the U.S. and not at all about protecting Venezuelans?
Yes, but we cannot select our allies, because a lot of people in the world doesn't believe us when we talk about political prisoners or narco-traffic or crimes against humanity. We don't select our allies in this moment. So in this moment, Donald Trump are doing a lot of things, and we are really, really small to stop some things. But at the same time, we are waiting for justice, because we need justice. So maybe we need more allies in the democratic people in the Latin America, not to stop the justice, not to stop the pressure about Venezuela, is to create a new form of conduct, the freedom of the people, the protection of the population. That's really, really important, not the impunity of the criminals.
And finally, for us, in a few moments, what are Venezuelans concerned about what happens next? Greater repression, harder times, what are they concerned about?
Our concern is that nothing happened and Delcy Maduro has the strongest dictatorship. That's our concern. That nothing happens is the worst. We need that. A lot of people are happening. We need some changes. We need a radical change in our system. We need a regime change, because at the same time the Venezuelan people made a lot of protests and manifestation, and they were killed. The Venezuelan people made dialogues and negotiation system, and the Chavismo broke that. And we made election, and we won to the Chavismo. We won.
And so with that awareness then, your hope is that something does in fact change. Luis Carlos Diaz, journalist and human rights defender in Venezuela. You've helped us here in Jamaica better understand what's going on. Thanks for speaking with us inside Lead Story, and please stay safe.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The Time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Yeah, we're here at Culture Works, the second staging.
Forward for the next staging of Skyline Levels Culture Works this Friday, 7 p.m.
Them in town.
I'm here right now at Skyline with Culture Works.
More works, positive, hopeful. Skyline Levels, I man, season 2, Culture Works.
Every day we're going in circles.
Yeah, Culture Works. Culture Works. It's like Culture Works started off a year, a great work for me.
Culture Work, yeah man, it's been a great journey.
Blessed love, we're at the Skyline Levels at Culture Works.
We're here again on a season 2, so I hope that you and your friend them come.
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story. What we've just heard is how power is felt on the ground. Next, we turn to what it means for international law and whether the legal order is keeping pace with global reality. And well, some are arguing that it isn't at all. We're joined in this segment by Sarita Ashraf, an international criminal barrister. Sarita, thanks for joining us inside Lead Story.
Lovely to be here.
Sarita, you are talking to a set of people who are asking big, important questions, like, is international law really law if we're watching all that is going on? That's been a big conversation going on here in Jamaica and across the world. Help us understand what is the context in which all of this is happening.
Thank you. It is a really challenging time, and I think a lot of us are grappling with the meaning of international law in the current circumstances. So I'm going to take the opportunity just to set out a little bit of what international law says, and then talk a little bit about the reactions and the broader, more global implications for what has happened in Venezuela over the past few days. As we know, the US launched an attack on Caracas and extracted Nicolas Maduro, the head of Venezuela, unrecognized by the United States, and who's now been taken to New York to face charges in a courtroom in New York. Some of the questions that have been raised by this is, what has this done to the international legal order? What about the sovereignty of Venezuela? Is the United States actions lawful under international law? Briefly, the international legal order clearly prohibits states from intervening in sovereign countries, in the sovereign affairs of other states. And so the question is really, what does the UN Charter say? Article 2.4 of the UN Charter bans states from using force against the territorial integrity and political independence of other states. That's been referred to by the International Court of Justice as the cornerstone of the United Nations Charter, and something that's embedded in customary international law. you can only have two exceptions to the prohibition on the use of force in Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. And that's where there's been a Security Council authorization, which there has not been in this case, or where the states are invoking self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. And here we see a difference of opinion. For a state to invoke its right to self-defense, it must be under armed attack or under the threat of armed attack, with the latter implying a grave instance of armed force, and also that any act of self-defense must be necessary and proportionate. And so here we're getting into a little bit of the debate of what the United States seems to be putting forward and what I think most international lawyers would say, which is that the right to self-defense is not properly actioned, that the United States does not have any plausible exceptions, cannot invoke any plausible exceptions to the use of force. The United States, as far as we can tell, is essentially saying that the drug trafficking, the smuggling of drugs towards US markets would amount to an armed attack under international law and then allow for an exception on the use of force. That's a very difficult argument to make. The threshold for an armed attack is quite high. Harmful consequences don't alone transform an activity, even an illegal activity, into an armed attack. And we've also seen that the International Court of Justice has resisted attempts to allow the Article 51 exception to be stretched in that way.
Sarita, this stretching, though, is part of what is concerning to many across the world, including from small states. Is this a stretching of international law, or just powerful states making their own rules and the rest of us following along? Because for many people, it was incredibly shocking that a sitting head of state, no matter who recognized him or not, was removed from his home country and brought before domestic courts in another one.
Yes, I mean, certainly this is not an extradition, which would occur under a legal process. This is what is an extraterritorial rendition, which the US has done in the past. It has been a facet of its post-9/11 programs of moving, for example, suspects to black sites and so forth. So this is not the first time, but it is always shocking, in my view. The question of whether they have torn up the rulebook, if we're in a new world of a new international legal order, is kind of a question that's being asked. It's a question that we don't really have the answer to yet. Certainly, you're seeing a certain degree of shock. To some extent, a lot of what we're looking at now is the reaction of other states. How are they reacting to what has happened, which is essentially going into a country, extracting their head of state and taking that individual to face charges in a domestic court. So there are essentially 3 points of views. One is very pessimistic, that we're now living in a world and embarking on a future where there will be a series of sovereignty breaching actions by powerful states. Powerful states will enjoy immunity, and there will be a sliding scale of whose territory is respected. So essentially a might is right world. Perhaps a more realistic view is that states will act according to their own interests, which is already to some extent, I think, a little bit of the case, and abide by rules of international law when it suits them. And the third view is that if there's a significant pushback where other states are condemning, that there'll be an emphasis on the necessity of a rule-based order. And certainly we see, for example, the UN Secretary General coming out, but the reaction from other states has been more muted than one might expect given what has happened.
Well, more muted, Sarita, hold on, but more muted because they have also other global conflicts that seem to oppose what they're saying here in this instance. Let's talk about some of them. China and Taiwan, sure. Ukraine and Russia, where we're seeing China's response to what's going on in Venezuela differ from what their response is, what they would consider internally with Taiwan. Ukraine and Russia, the European Union, not being able to come out as strongly on this as some would have hoped to hear from them. And then the big flashpoint with the United States again, between the United States and another NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization country, Denmark, where the United States, through President Donald Trump, has said they need Greenland as part of the Kingdom of Denmark for strategic reasons. All of those seem to be contrary positions to what has come out from quite a number of countries over the past few weeks, saying we hope for diplomatic reasoning, we are watching and observing the situation, but they haven't come out and categorically said what the US has done is wrong. Why?
Yes, I mean, there are some states that have come out. For example, Spain has been quite strong in their condemnation, as have Mexico, Brazil, and Chile. But it's also true we've not seen such strong condemnations from states that we would expect.
But Sarita, we also saw Spain come out in that statement, not with the European Union, but instead joining Mexico, who has been told by President Donald Trump they're next, joined by Colombia, who has been told that by President Donald Trump they're next, Uruguay, who has a history of U.S. involvement in their country. And so Spain had to break away from the EU to even have any sort of principled position, saying we don't respect Nicolas Maduro as the head of Venezuela, but we also don't support U.S. intervention.
Yes. I mean, I think what we're seeing here is it shows a real danger of circulating, of pinning your understanding of international law on the rights of wrongs of how you feel about a particular individual or a particular situation. There is this feeling that Maduro was a danger to Venezuela, had upended the will of the people, and there is some challenges as we see the Venezuelan population, including many of them in Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm now trying to grapple with the new realities. The danger of that, of course, is you can't have an international legal order based on how you feel about one specific circumstance. If a rule is created in Venezuela, which is that might is right, that states can go into other states without their consent, can extract people, can take over territory, which is not what the US is doing here, although it has been talking about running Venezuela. But that creates a precedent that then creates other dangers, including, for example, as you say, in relation to Denmark, it changes how one might look at Russia's seizing of territory in Ukraine. And certainly that is a worry if you move to states where sovereignty is something that only exists and can can only be honored by or not honored by states with political power, economic power, and military power. And that's not a world. That's a world that is inherently unstable and very unpredictable in terms of how power shifts. So it's a much more dangerous world if we were to move into that world. It is early days. We will see how the UN Security Council has seen stronger statements, but we're not seeing the same pushback that you might expect if it was in another situation. That is certainly true, and I think worrying.
Sarita, you're in Trinidad and Tobago, so I would consider that ground zero of this conversation, certainly from a Caribbean perspective. I'm in Jamaica. We're a small state. So what do we do when we see now global order shift from this rules-based order that we're accustomed to coming out of the United Nations to now the United States already saying it's going after Mexico, it's going after Colombia, it's going after Cuba, and says so in advance? What do we do?
I think the core thing, I mean, we are, as I said, not very powerful states. We are also subject to the economic weight of the United States as well, which is not something that is past the attention, for example, of the government in Trinidad and Tobago, certainly in their positioning. But it is really important that states step up inside the UN Security Council, inside the UN General Assembly, in its regional blocs, to at least recognize or put forward international legal norms, to put their weight behind international legal norms writ large. Now, that may not necessarily change anything in relation to Venezuela, but certainly when it comes to other countries that are around us, other countries in the world that are feeling concerned about how this may affect their own futures and their future sovereignty, that's speaking out, that's setting out a clear, bright line around Article 2.4 of the UN Charter on the prohibition of use of force and the respecting of sovereignty of states. That is integral.
That clear, bright line then is what we're going to be talking about next inside Lead Story, and that's been set up beautifully for us by international criminal barrister Sarita Ashraf. Sarita, thank you so much for joining us inside Lead Story. After the break, we'll take a look at what CARICOM did say, didn't say, and what regional leaders have said, including the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who has said other CARICOM leaders have been implicated in spreading drugs across the region, setting us all up for an explosion of this conflict. Stay with us here inside Lead Story.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
Jamaica, make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction. 'Cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music keeps on playing, and the people them I say we are my show tonight. Oh, what a feeling! Don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got a spark, don't put it down. Shine your lights on.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CBM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Yeah, we're here at Culture Works, the second staging.
Forward for the next staging of Skyline Levels Culture Works this Friday, 7 p.m.
There was someone. The rebels them in town.
I'm here right now at Skyline with Culture Works.
More works, positive, hopeful. Skyline Levels, I hit man, season 2, Culture Works.
Every day we're going in circles.
Yeah, Culture Works.
Culture Works. It's like Culture Works started off a year, a great work for me.
Culture work, yeah man, it's been a great journey.
Blessed love, we're at the Skyline Levels at Culture Works.
We're here again on a season 2, so I hope that you and your friend them come, right?
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
Yeah man, this is Graham Smargan. I want you to keep watching CBM TV, be inspired, be informed, right? See it happen right here on CBM TV. Morgan Heritage still here, 3000 and beyond. Graham Smargan said that. See it? Blessings.
Now, we've taken you through what this means globally, what it means in Venezuela, but you live in the Caribbean, so we'll talk about the Caribbean response and regional positioning of this conflict in Venezuela and what it means for us all. Joining us now is Kajan Hayes, lead editor for news gathering at Guardian Media in Trinidad and Tobago. Kajan, thanks for being here. Kajan, we've heard Caribbean leaders express concerns about what's unfolding. Why has this moment resonated so strongly in the region?
I think it's the first time it's really hit home for us. We've had conflicts before. There have been conflicts. There will be conflicts after this, but I think this is the first time that it's been so close to have a war or something along those lines happen within the Caribbean Sea. There have been skirmishes in South America, sure, but nothing of this level, this sort of armada building up in the Caribbean Sea, military planes flying in and out of Trinidad and Tobago. This is brand new territory for us. We are accustomed to, sand surf and carnival.
So with that changing, then we had on the morning of January 3 a statement from CARICOM. CARICOM said bright and early before you and I were awake, they were meeting. The first statement from CARICOM that they had issued just said that they met early following reports of military action in Venezuela, and they were actively monitoring the situation. For a situation that had been building up for several months now, that there had been discussions about what was going on, including the role of regional leaders. Were you expecting more from that first statement? Because the second statement that they had later on in the day indicated not that all of the CARICOM heads of government were involved, but that the Bureau of the Conference of Heads of Government, a smaller subset, were the ones that sent out this bigger press release. The outgoing chair from Jamaica, the current chair from St. Kitts, and the chair-to-be from St. Lucia were the ones that sat and had that meeting. Were you expecting more from these regional statements?
I think the issue that we're having now is that we are not seeing a CARICOM that was as united probably just about a year ago. We're not seeing the same level of unity that we would have seen in 2019 when Dr. Rowley and Mayor Motley and I think the Prime Minister of St. Kitts at the time, why is his name eluding me, would have gone to Washington, to the UN, to lobby against any sort of action against Venezuela. You would not have seen that unified Caribbean that would have held the crime as a simple, regional health issue just about 2 years ago. That does not exist anymore. There is a fractured CARICOM. So this statement being what it is not surprising for where CARICOM is right now. You would have our Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, being very anti-CARICOM. She's flat out saying CARICOM is an unreliable partner at this time, and Trinidad and Tobago needs to start looking for other partners to trade with, while at the same time saying she's not leaving CARICOM. So this was not surprising.
Well, let's go then to your Prime Minister, because a lot of the friction in CARICOM starting from October has come because we saw for the very first time a very public schism, where in the October press release, Trinidad and Tobago, in what was considered to be a very neutral release, said that it was not going to join a CARICOM-wide release on the situation taking place in Venezuela. And that just seemed to have devolved into Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar now sending out a series of tweets. After the Maduro capture in the morning, she said that Caribbean states were also implicated, indicating that she was the leader who would have then seen information and known about particular information, referencing the unsealed indictment of Nicolas Maduro that had been taken out, saying that there were politicians along what she called the Caribbean route corrupted by cocaine traffickers. And that seems to have exploded across the region, with everybody looking and saying, which Caribbean leaders are we talking about? What did that look like in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, it's interesting. The very first statement that did come out was her saying, hey, we had nothing to do with this. And it was funny because it was like, nobody asked you. But she knew what was going to come because of the closeness that she's had with the U.S. Since she came into power. As for this...
and we also, Kijan, have been following here in Lead Story the radar that had been put in Tobago and the friction that had been created not only with the former Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, but also the opposition and also the head of the Tobago section of your country, with them saying, all them, we weren't told about this, and the Prime Minister can give us no real reasoning as to why the United States had been allowed to place this radar in Tobago, a radar that is now suspected to have contributed to the capture of Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah, it's been a wild couple of months. Now, keep in mind, Grenada would have been asked if they could have this radar, and Dickon Mitchell said no. And our Prime Minister clearly said, yes, bring it in. Now, remember, they are still very adamant that this has nothing to do with regime change. They are still going down the lines of this is all about drug trafficking and narco trafficking, or whatever the word you want to use. They are now saying that this radar helped lower our crime rate, kind of ignoring the fact that we've had a state of emergency for 9 out of the last 12 months, so to speak. So there is a lot that's been happening, and a lot of people are wondering, well, why this sort of why this animosity, really? You can disagree, but you can disagree diplomatically. That's something that we're not seeing, because it seems as though everybody who disagrees and says maybe we shouldn't, it's the responses, and she's done it with the opposition, well, you're supporting narco trafficking, or maybe, or your party, she's called the PNM party, supported by drug dealers or funded by drug dealers with no evidence. And that's what this, if you look at the indictment, what does the indictment say in terms of evidence? It just says it's like a vague sort of no context post of leaders who are benefiting from it, but it doesn't actually say what it is. There's no evidence. There's nothing that points to any particular leader anyway.
And I think that is so important, because there were very many persons who said that what she said was dangerous. What are then the risks for small states if the region fails to speak with a coherent voice in a moment like this, especially when you're now looking at what might be characterized as a might is right approach at international law, and we're not mighty at all.
We really aren't. We are ants in this thing ready to be steamrolled. The only benefit that we do have is probably standing together, and we don't really have that. And what you've found is, and this isn't the first time it's happened, under the first Trump administration, there was a little fracturing of CARICOM at the time too. You would have
Jamaica would have been part of what had been indicated as that fracturing.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to say. Andrew Holness, who at the time would have been the guy, seemed as though he was very pro-Trump. Alan Chastany at the time would have been very pro-Trump. Hubert
former
Minnis
head
from Bahamas.
Former head of St. Lucia, former head of the Bahamas, countries that at the time had leaders that looked like they were very pro-US, had been very, very much apart. Now they have 2 of 3 of those leaders are no longer in power. Prime Minister Dr. Holness continues to be in power, but he's nowhere near as visible as Kamla Persad-Bissessar on this matter. What do we then do? Because she is closest to the situation there in Venezuela.
Yeah, she's taken up the mantle and run with it as the most pro-US. We really used to joke here in Trinidad that, no offense to your listeners, but we used to joke that Jamaica wanted to be the 51st state. And now here we are in Trinidad, we are now that person seemingly jockeying to be the 51st state. But the real question is, and what we've been asking here at home is, to what end? All of this posturing and pro-America language, we haven't seen what the end game is, whether the end game is we are going to benefit from any sort of oil and gas that the US may extract from Venezuela now under this new regime. Are we looking for like a flat out bailout in terms of the similar to what Argentina has? We don't know what the end game is. Some people are saying maybe it's just the path of least resistance, but the path of least resistance would just be to say nothing. Trinidad's foreign policy has always been non-interference and non-intervention. We're friends of all, satellites of none. I'm sure we've heard that 100 times. But that has been upended, and we've chosen a side. And I guess it only remains to be seen what's the benefit or to what detriment it might, it was going to come from it.
Well, as we close, Kijan, we're small states. We're trying to figure out how this works. What should Caribbean leadership do to keep us all safe?
Well, that's not for me. I'm just a spectator, just like you as a reporter. I have no idea, and that's the thing. We just keep looking every single day, and we're going to try to report on what's been happening. I don't know if I can offer any advice, but I know like I said, this is brand new territory, and you're about my age. I think we are quite tired of living in unprecedented times. We want some normalcy for just a little while, please.
A little normalcy is all we're asking for. Kijan Haynes, lead editor of News Gathering at Guardian Media in Trinidad and Tobago. We're looking and crossing our fingers and toes to that normalcy, but it might be a while to come. Thanks for joining us inside Lead Story. We're going to take a break and then close with 3 big stories around the world that you need to know. Stay with us.
Everybody want to save a country right now.
One thing about Jamaicans, we might have differences, but we know when something is good for all of us. And when we work together against crime and violence, we are stronger than ever. And that's how we know the Citizen Security Plan can work.
That one that name CSP.
The Citizen Security Plan is an initiative of the Ministry of National Security in partnership with the European Union. It's an all-of-government effort to create safer streets and build stronger communities. Go to mns.gov.jm to learn how you can play your part.
Yeah, we're here at Culture Works, the second staging.
Forward for the next staging of Skyline Levels Culture Works this Friday, 7 p.m.
There was someone. The rebels them in town.
I'm here right now at Skyline with Culture Works.
More works, positive, hopeful. Skyline levels. I hit man, season 2, Culture Works.
Every day we're going in circles.
Yeah, Culture Works.
Culture Works.
It's like Culture Works started off a year, a great work for me.
Culture Work, yeah man, it's been a great journey.
Blessed love, we're at the Skyline Levels at Culture Works.
We're here again on a season 2, so I hope that you and your friend them come, right?
With all that has gone on all around the world, we're still keeping you up to date on all the stories you need to know. And we close Lead Story tonight with 3 global stories that speak to power, control, and consequence. The first comes from Cuba, because we are watching a situation where Venezuela's deposed leader, Nicolas Maduro, doesn't only impact international law, it also impacts domestic situations, especially there inside Cuba. And they are bracing for even tougher times ahead now that they don't have the support of Venezuela and Venezuelan oil. Let's take a listen to this report.
In Havana, fear mixes with a hard reality. Residents worry that hard lives are about to get even more difficult.
I don't want to be pessimistic, but I am realistic. 2026 is going to be tough, very tough, but we have to keep fighting.
For decades, Cuba has endured US sanctions and trade embargo. But Venezuela's oil, which meets around half of Cuba's current energy shortfall, has helped keep the lights on. That supply is now in doubt. Many Cubans see Washington tightening the screws.
Between Trump and Marco Rubio, it has always been about the country's economy. The blockade we've had for who knows how many years, more than 60 years, so they are not going to rest.
Cuba's economy is in deep trouble. Tourism is in decline. And protests, once unthinkable, have erupted in recent years. Analysts warn losing Venezuela's support could push the island into its deepest crisis yet, unless allies come to the rescue.
No hay duda que para Cuba es un peligro.
There is no doubt that the lack of Venezuelan support is a danger and a threat to Cuba. There is confirmed information that a Chinese envoy has been in Havana and also on a Russian position.
Cuba used to send health workers and security personnel to Venezuela in exchange for support. But dozens of Cuban security officers were killed in the US operation. For ordinary Cubans, there is uncertainty and a feeling that another storm is coming. Once again, survival may depend on who steps in next.
And who steps in next is an open question at this point in time. Mexico has been supporting Venezuela and Cuba. They're the ones that are stepping in for the rest of the oil, but they're now under threat by the United States. This story reminds us that geopolitics is never abstract. When alliances, big alliances shift, it's ordinary people that pay the price. Moving on now further afield to Uganda, where they have now banned live streaming of protests. One president in place for almost 40 years has decided that when the elections come up on January 15, he'd like to be president again. And that has led to increasing protests, but also an increasing look at what controlling the digital space can do. More in this report.
Uganda's government said on Monday it was banning live broadcasts of unauthorized protests and violent incidents. It comes ahead of the country's general elections as authorities detained hundreds of opposition supporters. President Yoweri Museveni is seeking to extend his 40-year rule in the January 15 vote. The 81-year-old faces a challenge by pop star turned politician Bobi Wine, who is just over half his age. In a statement, the Ministry of Information Communication and Technology said, quote, live broadcasting or streaming of riots, unlawful processions or violent incidents is prohibited as it can escalate tensions and spread panic. The authorities often describe anti-government protests as riots. A ministry official rejected rumors that it was shutting down the internet.
Claims suggesting otherwise are false claims.
But it has banned the spreading of any content it described as inciting, hateful or violent. More than 50 people were killed before the last election in 2021 as security forces cracked down on Wine's supporters. They had accused Museveni of stealing the election, which the president denied. Museveni is Africa's third longest ruling head of state. He came to power in 1986 after leading a 5-year rebellion. Critics and rights groups have long accused his government of torturing and intimidating opponents to maintain his grip on power, allegations he has denied. Rights group Amnesty International said on Monday Ugandan authorities have launched what it called a brutal campaign of repression against Wine supporters in the run-up.
So you're watching Uganda's President Museveni decide that he is going to stay in power. And he's using the digital space to do so. Here we're showing you how states are increasingly controlling the digital space in the name of security, with serious implications for democracy and free expression, something that we're watching in this part of the world and beyond. Final story for you in our top 3 stories that you should pay attention to. What happens if people make you naked online? That's what's been going on. I tried this on social media platform X, posting a story saying that I would not want persons or the social media tool, AI tool Grok, to allow persons to undress me online. Well, people, actual human people went and attempted to undress me anyway. This is also the case of a young woman in France. And now France has decided that it has to see how its legal system can deal with the case of artificial intelligence making men, and mostly women, feel incredibly unsafe in online spaces. More in this report.
When she posted her holiday outfit on X, this young woman did not think that she would end up naked on the internet. For the past few days, users have been asking Grok, X's generative AI chatbot, to undress women and sometimes even minors without their consent. For Marion, this was a violation of privacy.
It's really upsetting to see this. You wonder, why would anyone do that? When do you decide to do that to people you don't even know on social media? I think there have been about 30 cases. It hurts to see yourself like that. It's not my body, but it looks similar. And then people can reuse the image anywhere. That's the issue.
She reported it to the platform, but some images of her naked are still online. Instances of free and accessible AI that are stripping women and men of their clothing are on the rise. Here, a user asks the chatbot to put this young woman in a bikini. Victims have been advised to immediately report illegal content on the platform as well as to authorities. For their part, ministers and members of parliament have also reacted.
Outraged by requests made to Grok AI to strip girls and women, while the image is artificial, the harm is very real.
The courts must examine X's criminal liability. This is something new because there is no jurisprudence in France on this issue yet. So it's excellent that the courts are taking up the case.
Another victim has launched an online petition calling for greater regulation of generative AI. The U.S. Federal Communications Commission did not immediately respond for comment, while the Federal Trade Commission declined to comment.
So you're watching a situation where you have a gap between rapidly evolving technology and the law's ability to protect rights and dignity. It's happening in France, it's happening here in Jamaica, and we'll keep you up to date as to what's going on to address this situation. Tonight's threat is clear. When power moves faster than law, small states, civilians, and democratic norms are the first to feel it. Understanding that reality is no longer optional anywhere on this planet. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team, thanks for watching Lead Story. Later on tonight for Lead Story Prime, we're discussing the baby recession. We're not having enough babies, and we are exploring why. So join us inside Lead Story Prime as we give you the up-to-date and detailed look into Jamaica's fertility crisis. Have a great night, and I hope you stay safe.